Today we're going to break from our normal lecture format so that we can spend some time reviewing clips from an interview that I recently did with a service owner. Rob Groom is a digital service owner for the University of Southern California. Without further ado, let's jump right into our interview with Rob. We started by asking Rob to tell us a bit more about the service that he provides. Let's hear what he had to say.
Take a very disparate and federated model across the university and pull it all together and try and take vulnerability management specifically to a much more central location in a way that it was going to allow us to understand what was happening across our environment, give folks the ability to track their vulnerabilities outside of the old Excel spreadsheets that everybody's been using for way too long, and understand what the remediation cycles truly look like across the university rather than trying to guess.
From everyone doing their own thing, like a bunch of independent companies, to an enterprise class service for vulnerability management. This is a very common use case. Let's go on to the next one. Next, we asked Rob about the outcomes of the consumer side as well as the outcomes on the provider side, and this is his response.
What this service allowed us to do was, across the university, with multiple different units, control who saw what in terms of vulnerabilities from their systems, how they interact with their vulnerabilities, and then how they remediated them. And it really allowed us to get much more visibility and an accurate representation of not only the vulnerabilities that we're seeing across the environment, but also how people are working with them.
I then went in and asked Rob to elaborate a little bit more on the consumers and what they were like. And these are some of his comments.
We have 52 different schools and units that all have very different IT structures, different levels of engagement, different levels of knowledge, different staffing levels, different technology levels. So we're trying to cater to the small single unit with one or two sysadmins, maybe a director or a manager and an admin, all the way up to a larger school that may have a team of 15 sysadmins that work, on applications. They work on operating systems. They work on servers, hardware, desktops across the board. So we're really looking at all of the different types of schools from the very tiny to the very large.
Interesting to think that the consumers are so different, yet they still have that common need to manage vulnerabilities. My next series of questions with Rob were about walking us through how he started the conversations for the service and how he went about getting buy-in from so many consumers all at one time, especially when they're all used to doing their own thing for so long.
When I took this role in February of 2018, one of my main operational goals was to fix how vulnerability management was done across the university. I looked at a lot of different products. I looked at a lot of different ways to do this. How can we track it? How can we keep it equally secure while usable at the same time, with a common sense approach of, I need to be able to see my vulnerabilities when they occur, what the criticality is, but I don't want my neighbor to see them. As we looked at all of the different options that we had, the vulnerability response module in ServiceNow came up because we were already using the ITSM component of ServiceNow. So it made a lot of sense. It was something that people were familiar with. It was something that we could integrate with our current workflows. Ultimately, what it allowed us to do is to take all of these schools and units that already are using the ITSM module. They're already using the service. They're already using the functionality of ServiceNow and expand that so that we have really one place where people go if they have an issue and they need to remediate something or they have a problem. So whether it be a task, a request, an incident, or just tracking your vulnerabilities, it was all done in one place and really tried to centralize that into one tool.
I found that segment very interesting, how Rob leveraged something familiar to get that initial buy-in. In our discussions, Rob went into a lot more detail about how important it was to stay close to his executive contacts on his side, the provider side, as well as all the executive contacts, which were the leadership stakeholders in each of those individual schools. Those are certainly a lot of great tips for both current as well as aspiring service owners. My next line of questioning was around the results. What were those results like? Are there quantifiable benefits? And did the stakeholders feel like they got what they had signed up for when they agreed to it?
It was more about overall engagement with the schools and the units for us.
Okay.
There was a financial implication, of course. I felt like, while not necessarily quantifiable, there was a qualifiable reduction of effort in the schools and the units being able to understand and identify what their critical vulnerabilities were. Can you put a finger on it and say, each unit is going to save X amount of time? No, but when I was doing this work, I know how long it takes to go through a spreadsheet with 1,500 lines of vulnerabilities. It takes a really long time. So if it took myself and one of my admins 3 days to do that, and now they don't have to do that anymore, I am saving some time. Hopefully that time could be used to do the remediations and do the configuration changes and mitigate the issues that we found. The other piece was giving them visibility, giving the executives visibility. Very simple, very direct, very central visibility. We're still continually working on that. Yes, we could find that visibility in the vulnerability scanner. Great. But having one place to go where we could tie not only the vulnerabilities together with an incident, but also with now the SIR module, we could tie all those together. We had much better information from my incident response analysts. They didn't have to pivot into 3 different tools to be able to understand what was happening on an endpoint. And then we were able to really drive home the fact that we're trying to help the schools and the units be more effective and be more efficient, and try to lower the risk profile across the university. And that was the big selling point. It was, how do we manage this better? How do we get better visibility on it? And at the end of the day, is it worth the money that we're going to spend? And ultimately, it absolutely was, because it's one place to go. I need to see where this is. It's one place to go.
Early on in this course, we mentioned that for internal providers, the selling point is almost always going to be financially driven. As we just heard from Rob, it's not going to be, hey, I spent $50,000 and here's where I got $100,000 in benefits. That would be nice, but the quantification of some of those soft value points are even more important. They're still financial in the end, but it's not always that cut and dry hard dollar savings that we see. I asked Rob to talk to us a bit about who you work with to support, improve, and increase adoption of his service. And here's what he had to say.
Lately, it's been operational support as we grow the capabilities and functionalities of the platform. My vulnerability assessment manager is probably the one that utilizes the platform the most. He works with all of the different schools, all of the different IT directors on campus to ensure that they have what they need. There's always some quirks and some things that we're looking to streamline, and from a process perspective, from a visibility perspective, whether it be, how are the vulnerabilities grouped? How are the vulnerable items grouped? What does the system look like? How are we presenting that data out to the customer? Constantly trying to evolve the service offering so that we ensure that they have the ability, again, to do what they need to do on their side of the fence, which is, we can identify stuff all day long. I mean, that's the easy part, right? We throw a scanner at it. You go, hey, you got 15 critical vulnerabilities. And, the guy on the other end or the gal on the other end may say, we don't know what to do with these. We have no idea, right? Trying to build those knowledge bases, trying to build those articles for support for the end units when they do have a critical vulnerability. Here's what we have. It's also allowing us to track, a 0 day. You see a 0 day come out. We look both in the scanner and in ServiceNow. We tie everything together. We map it up, and then we get those notifications out to the schools and units. So, we're constantly looking at providing a better service. So we're always gonna have operational change on the system, but we're also making sure that the customers are getting what they need. Matter of fact, we're getting ready to go back out and do another training session for them because it's been a while, and there's been some new folks who started at the university since we launched. So we're going to go out and do a proactive training session with these folks again.
Rob is 2 years in, as he mentioned, so it makes perfect sense that his teams are doing regular operational support, continuous improvement, as well as ongoing training to ensure adoption of his service. I asked Rob a little bit more detail around his practice around continuous improvement. I asked him to tell us what plans he has to improve his service for vulnerability management.
Automation is a big piece of what we're looking at doing over the next 6 to 12 months in my part of the organization across the board. So for security operations in general, we're trying to look at automation and orchestration from the top level down. What can I do to support my teams in a way that I don't have to just bring in a bunch of bodies to do work? Because I think we're past that at this point. We need to really understand what is it that we're doing on a regular basis that is repeatable, continuous, and just nonstop, ongoing, all the time. And remediation of critical vulnerabilities in some of our more valuable assets on campus is something that we're looking at a full integration with an endpoint configuration management system. So finds a critical vulnerability, reaches out to that system, says, you need to remediate this. It gives it not only the vulnerability, but the CVE. So it can tie that back to a patch, hopefully, if there's a patch that exists. Do all of that automatically so that the end users and the sysadmins don't have to worry about, wait, did I patch that one? Did I not? It's lined up. And then where we would want to really look at is, what are those capabilities? What happens when it can't find a patch for that vulnerability? What happens if the vulnerability has already been patched, but it's still showing up? How do we begin to reduce some of the false positives? How do we begin to streamline the process so that we have less and less user interaction to keep all of the systems across the university at as much of a baseline as we can get in an environment that has upwards of 80,000 endpoints, right? And not only just 80,000 endpoints, but we have the Thornton School of Music, we have the Viterbi School of Engineering, and if you don't think that those two are very different from a systems requirement perspective, it's crazy. So just constantly looking at how do we take all of our tools and just simplify them across the board.
I loved Rob's answer to that improvement question, because too many people just deliver the minimum and then they stop. In most cases, your first version is just scratching the surface of your value. Phase 2 and 3 go into things like Rob talked about around automation and artificial intelligence. And this is where the real value starts. My big takeaway from Rob is to start by aiming at automation. It doesn't have to come in phase 1, but it should be a long-term goal. I finished by asking Rob about what we talked about earlier in this course. In this course, we're encouraging service owners to behave like entrepreneurs and have their team act like a startup. And I asked Rob if he thought this was the right approach. Here's what he had to say.
Absolutely. I think that if you are not acting in that manner with any operational job, whether you're a director or a manager or even an analyst or a sysadmin, if you're not looking at everything that you can do to make your service better, to provide a better support model and better mechanism for delivery than what you're doing now, then you're really in the wrong role, in my perspective. From an operational perspective, when I started, the security operations team at USC was immature. There are a lot of talented folks, but the team, the group was fairly immature. So looking at how do you build a better wheel, right? How do you build a better boat? How do you build a better widget? Whatever it may be, however you want to look at it. If you're not looking at constantly doing that with everything that you support, then you're going to get left behind. And I think that's one thing that I've always tried to push is, don't look at where you are today. Look at where we want to be. Look at how we're going to get there, and look at what it's going to take to get us there. And what does that mean for us? Well, it gives your people ownership. It gives your people the drive to continue to do that. It gives them vision, and it gives them something to be excited about. In the work that we do, it can become very mundane, which is why I want to do some of that orchestration. So I tell them, bring ideas to the table. bring things to the table that you can change, that we can change together, that would allow you to be more effective in some of the other things that you want to do. So I think it's an incredibly interesting way to phrase that drive of vision and of growing an organization to a place that will allow you to be much more effective.
I want to take a moment to thank Rob for his time in answering all of our questions and being part of our Service Owner 101 training. We'll see you in the next lecture.